this year, well, last year actually, November 2nd, 2024, I was fortunate enough to harvest a mature buck 10-point on public land. And I want to talk about the steps that led me to that success. It starts right now. It's January, and this is what I do in January. I start focusing on mapping. I look at areas that I think that have potential. I look at the surroundings, neighboring properties, who own it. And I like to find areas that are at least a mile in from any access point. If it's further, is there a way that I can take a bike in or walk in? Whatever options I have, I think about all that and I put it all together in my head after I look at the surrounding areas, and I decide how I'm going to approach it. So one of the things that I seek out when I'm looking at the surrounding properties is who owns them. Is it public land surrounded by other public land? Is it public land that is bordered on one side by private land and public land on the other side? What are the access points? Is there a road, a side road, a dirt road that circles the area? Is there a major highway that cuts through the property? You've got to think all about that. Just think about it. If there's a major highway that cuts through on one side of the property or borders one side of the property, and it's a limited access highway like a interstate or a turnpike, that limits hunter access. You don't see many people driving down interstates or turnpike and accessing the property because for the most part there's fencing. You'd have to climb over the fence. I know there's some people who probably cut fences. I've driven alongside turnpike and I've driven alongside interstates and you see the fence cut, and people do access it to some degree, but they're not going to go over that fence and then walk a mile and a half two into their areas most likely. So you've got to find access points. So what borders a target area is very significant. It will tell you the pressure that it gets. Is there a road that goes internally? Because if there's an easy accessible road, that encourages hunters to walk in a little further. Okay, but I've always talked about on previous videos hard access. The more difficult, the better. But you have to be reasonable. Obviously, you have to get in there. And on public land, it's not like you can trim a path. You can't trim a path. You've got to find a natural path that makes it viable. So I follow animal trails or logging roads. That's another thing you have to consider. So the property that I hunted this past season was surrounded on every side except for one by private land. And the roads were, at least any road from the points that I wanted to hunt, was about a mile in any direction. So someone would have to come through all the private land, and that makes the spot more likely a better spot because most private lands don't have an overabundance of hunters. Most private land that I've come across is posted to begin with, and there's a limited amount of hunters, whether it be family or whatever the case may be. And I know the one side of the property where I harvested the 2024 buck was heavily posted, and there's a limited amount of hunting. So that's encouraging sanctuary. Deer are really frequenting the area, and they hold up in there pretty well. So once you look at it on the map, you can decide those things. And you could probably pick out numerous locations and decide, well, this looks like a spot based on what surrounds it. This looks like a spot I want to hunt based on what surrounds it. And I like public lands that are really heavily surrounded by private land. where you have to walk deep into the public land. Now, public land that is vast and open and large, that's great too. But little sections, I avoid. If you can access it a quarter mile, half mile, I avoid it because it's easy, and you don't want that because it encourages people to get in there. And let's face it, a lot of people just don't like to walk very far, and that's a nice way of putting it. And if you take the hard, long walk, it often pays off. I'm writing and organizing my history of hunting in a book that I want to publish eventually. I'm about 9 or 10 chapters into it, and it's going to end up being about 12 or 13. And I can remember when I was just a little kid, like 8, 9 years old, when we hunted this vast tract of private land, and we walked in well over a mile. I honestly don't know how far it was, but it took forever. When I was a kid, it seemed like it was the longest walk of my life. But we harvested a lot of deer. Well, I didn't because I was too young. I just tagged along, but family members did. So that long, hard walk will pay off in the end, and that's the big point of this first part that I want to talk about: the long, hard walk. So establish positions on the map that look like they have potential, that are surrounded by difficult access. So if you have a hunting point a mile or more from that hunting point, focus on accessible points that are at least a mile or more. That's encouraging. That will tell you that it has hard access because most people aren't going to walk over a mile. And then you want to get in there, get boots on the ground. You're going to have to examine what's there, the terrain, the vegetation, the layout of the land. Obviously you can get that from topo maps, but what you see on a topo map and the little characteristics that you see when you're actually out there give you a full picture. So you have to put boots on the ground. And we're having I would say a little below normal winter. Once the snows start to melt and the temperatures go up, you get a good melt, you get out there. I don't care if it's January, February, whatever. So you can see the sign from the fall, and that'll help you get a great indication. And you can see the vegetation and everything that's out there in terms of whether it be oak trees, whether it be any type of forage, how thick the cover is. Areas where I hunt, we have a lot of greenbrier, and I focus in on greenbrier. It has, you look at biologists, it has a lot of protein, the greenbrier, and deer they'll eat off the greenbrier all year long. Obviously it has leaves in the summertime. But make one final point, and I'll add on to this as we go to the next step. Take the long, hard walk, use maps to establish points that you want to access and hunt, and make sure those points, that area that you want to hunt, is a mile or more from any access road, okay? And I prefer areas that are either in deep, thick, heavy public land, large tracts, I'm talking thousands of acres, or areas of public land that are probably 250, 300 or more acres that are surrounded by public, or are surrounded by private. So public land surrounded by private that goes deep in. And I think you'll have some success. So think about that now. It's a good time right now to think about it, because what are you going to do when there's a lot of snow and it's very cold? It makes things real difficult. So the next installment, I'll talk about what I do after I map out areas and decide that I want to focus on them.